All right, so we'll begin by going over the process for setting up a consolidated plan in the eCon Planning Suite. When creating a new consolidated plan in the system, you have two options. The first is to copy an existing con plan, and the second is to add a new blank con plan template. There are pros and cons to each option, so users should consider which makes the most sense for your jurisdiction. For option one, you would create your new con plan by copying a previous con plan in the system. Copying a plan retains most of the information from the source plan, including the source plan's narrative, any alternate data sources, and the CPD program selections, while updating the default data in the new con plan to the most current default data that is in the eCon Planning Suite. You will need to manually update the narrative throughout the template to ensure that it still reflects current conditions. The downside of option one is that you won't be able to edit specific information for the new con plan. This includes the CPD grant program selections and the public housing authorities that are included on the AD25 screen. So if the grant programs or PHAs that are listed in your previous con plan are no longer accurate for your jurisdiction, do not use option one to create your new plan because you won't be able to update this information. Instead, you're going to want to use option two. So option two involves using the add link, which will create a blank con plan template in the system. With option two, users can select the grant programs and PHA selections during the initial setup of the plan. The con plan template isn't going to have any previous narrative, so you do need to make sure that you add narrative to all sections of the plan. And lastly, the template is going to include the most recent default data. So this is the process for creating a new con plan for states and entitlement communities. The process is very similar for Consortia, but we'll touch more on that shortly. Now we'll quickly walk through the steps for creating a new con plan, beginning with option one. Don't worry about trying to take notes right now during the presentation. These slides will be made available after today's webinar. There are also quick guides that are available on the HUD Exchange and provide step-by-step instructions for creating a new con plan, and we will provide the link for those at the end of the presentation. So to create a con plan using option one, you should first log into IDIS and navigate to the Plans, Projects, Activities tab along the top blue bar of the screen. From here, you'll want to scroll down until you see the Consolidated Plan submenu on the left of the screen, and you can see that on the slide at the top left. You'll then click on the copy link. The system is then going to show the prompts that you see on the slide. At the top, you'll see a Select Source Con Plan button. Click this button to search for and select the con plan that you would like to copy. It is important to note that a plan is only going to be eligible for copying if it has a status of review completed. Once you select the plan you wish to copy, the system is going to take you back to the Copy Con Plan screen, and you can go ahead and enter the remaining information for the new plan, including the start and end years. Remember that the start and end years for your con plan are going to be the federal fiscal start and end years rather than your jurisdiction's local start and end years. You won't be able to edit this information after you press the copy button. So if you have any doubt, first verify the info and then set up your plan. Once you've entered all the info and responded to each of the prompts, press the copy button on the bottom left and you'll create your new con plan. Now we're going to cover creating a con plan using option two. To create a con plan with the add link, you'll go back to the Consolidated Plan submenu and this time select the add link. The system will then take you to the AD25 screen, which you can see on the slide. Since you're adding a blank con plan template, option two does require more data entry than option one. To start, go ahead and enter the federal fiscal start and end years for your new con plan, as well as a title and a version. Just note that you won't be able to change those start and end years or the version after you create the con plan. Once you enter that information, scroll down and you'll keep responding to the prompts. The next one is the If Amendment drop-down menu. And so for a new comp plan, you should change the value to NA. And this signifies that it is a new comp plan and not an amendment. As a side note, there is a quick guide that walks through the process for amending a comp plan or an action plan. So I recommend consulting that for more info on that process. Next, you're going to want to check the box next to the CPD grant programs for your jurisdiction. So as I mentioned before, you're not going to be able to edit this info once you save the screen. So it's important to be sure that you select all the correct programs, because the selections you make here are going to determine which screens and prompts are available to you in the rest of the comp plan. After selecting your programs, you're going to want to indicate whether the plan is for a grantee, a consortium, or if it's a regional plan. Further down, you will see a Select Public Housing Agency button. Click this button to search for and select the PHAs for your jurisdiction. So if your jurisdiction has multiple PHAs, or if you are a member of a consortium and there are multiple PHAs in the consortium, you'll want to add your PHAs one at a time. Once you've done so, review all the information on AD 25 to make sure it is correct before hitting that Save button. So that was the process for states and entitlement communities. For Consortia, the process is nearly the same. The primary difference is that only the lead entity of the home consortium should set up the comp plan. Once the lead entity sets up their comp plan, the system is going to generate comp plan templates for each participating member. Similarly, only the lead entity will be able to submit the comp plan. Once they submit their comp plan, the system automatically submits the comp plans for all other members. So really, this means that coordination between all members of the consortium is crucial to ensure it goes as smoothly as possible. And there is also a separate quick guide that specifically covers this process for Consortia. All right, now we'll talk more about the different sections of the comp plan template. Here's an overview of the different sections of the comp plan. The eCon Planning Suite Desk Guide, which is also available on the HUD Exchange, includes more information on each screen in the comp plan. A key takeaway here is that the Year 1 action plan screens are included in the comp plan template. And this is very important. So since the screens for your first annual action plan are included in the comp plan template, this means that you should not create a separate Year 1 action plan in the system. I'd also like to note that if you are a member of a consortium, you won't see all the screens included in the comp plan template in your own template. So this slide includes a screenshot of a table included in the eCon Planning Suite Desk Guide that shows you which screens you will see as a member of a consortium, depending on which grant programs you receive. So on the left are the screens that are included in the lead entities template for the needs assessment. The middle column is for a participating member of a consortium who only receives CDBG, and the column on the right is for a participating member who receives CDBG and ESG. So as you can see, the lead entities comp plan includes most of the screens for the consortium. The eCon Planning Suite Desk Guide includes the entire table, which outlines which screens from each section of the plan are available for different members. So if you're part of a consortium, I recommend reviewing this table. All right, next I'll provide an overview of the different elements of the comp plan template. The slide includes an example of a narrative field for the comp plan. For most narrative fields, there is a 4,000 character limit, which does include spaces. When you're entering text in the comp plan, you can type directly into a narrative field or paste text from a Word document. If you're pasting text, be sure to use the Word widget tool, which is the icon that the red arrow on the slide is pointing to. You're going to want to use this tool if it's available for the specific narrative field. And that's because this tool strips your text of any hidden characters that can be embedded and cause error messages in the system. Lastly, I'd like to point out that various narrative fields and data tables throughout the ConPlan template allow you to add additional content such as JPEGs, additional text, and tables. And this can really be a great way to supplement your response to a specific prompt. Not all narrative fields and data tables are going to include the links highlighted at the bottom of the slide, but you can add the content using these links where they fit throughout the ConPlan. Next, we have data tables. So the slide includes an example of a data table found in the market analysis section of the ConPlan. You'll notice that the individual cells of the table are grayed out. This is because the table includes the default data provided in the eCon planning suite. If you look towards the bottom of the table, you'll see the default data is from the 2013-2017 5-year estimates from the American Community Survey. So currently, the 13 to 17 estimates are the most current default data in the system, but you do have the option of locating more recent data and including it in your ConPlan. If you'd like to replace the default data, one way to do that is by clicking the alternate data button underneath a specific data table. The system will then allow you to search for and select any existing alternate data sources that your jurisdiction may have already added to the eCon planning suite. And if none exist, you'll see a link to add a new source. Simply follow the prompts to add the new alternate data source. Once you add or select an existing data source, the system will take you back to the data table and add the alternate data source as a citation towards the bottom of the table. So as an example here, we created and added a new data source for the most recent ACS estimates for 2016 to 2020, which you can see at the bottom of the table. You'll notice that once you add an alternate data source, the cells in the data table become editable. You can add one of two types of alternate data sources to your ConPlan. The first is survey data, which can include neighborhood surveys or formal studies that use statistical methods. The second type is administrative data, which can include local, state, or federal data sets, such as the American Community Survey, or ACS, the Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy data, or CHAS, or state unemployment data. In general, as you're working through the ConPlan template, it's a good idea to save frequently. For example, for screens with multiple narrative fields and data tables, it's a good idea to save frequently as you enter data in each field. As I mentioned before, it's also important to use the word widget tool when pasting text into a narrative field. In addition, another good idea is to consider creating an appendix if you have a lot of additional content that you would like to include in your ConPlan. So since not all narrative fields and data tables include links to add supplemental content, it may be simpler to compile all additional material into an appendix and add it as a PDF to the AD25 screen. So if you do decide to go with this option, we recommend clearly labeling each table, chart, map, or graph in the appendix, and then explicitly referencing it in your narrative responses so that it's clear to your reader that they need to consult the appendix. As you're working through the ConPlan, you'll also notice that the header for each screen includes a regulatory citation for the specific screen requirements. The example on the slide is for the NA10 Housing Needs Assessment screen, and you can copy and paste the CFR citation into eCFR, which is linked on the slide, to read more about the specific requirements for the screen. When you've finished entering your information into the ConPlan template, you should run a quality check on the AD25 screen. So when you click the quality check button, the system is going to provide any error statements in red or warnings in black to highlight sections of the plan where there may be missing information or some issue with the content entered. we recommend reading through all quality check messages and navigating to the reference screen. So some quality check warnings you may be able to ignore. For example, if they do not apply to your jurisdiction. Some errors may indicate issues that could cause your plan to be rejected as incomplete. So it really is imperative that you ensure that you've addressed any issues that were identified. Users can still submit their comp plan even if there are quality check warnings. However, you should address all quality check errors. So once you're ready to submit your plan, use the status drop-down menu at the end of the AD25 screen and change the status to submitted for review. Then click the Save button and your plan has been submitted. All right, now we'll turn it over to Joel, who will discuss new features and requirements.
Hey, thanks, Nikki. I appreciate that. Lots of good info. All right, share presenter, thanks. All right, so we're going to go through a few of the latest changes that have been made to the eCon planning suite. Most of these probably don't necessarily meet the definition of being new by now. They've been out for a while, but it's still worth looking through today together. So we have the MA60, the broadband screen, the MA65 is the hazard mitigation screen. Both of these have narrative prompts. There's 2 questions on each, which we'll go through. And then each of these also have a consultation requirement. One thing too to follow up, so Nikki showed you a chart earlier. If you're part of a home consortium of which members have access to which screens. And both of these screens are to be answered by all grantees. So this is true for all members of a home consortium, as well as the lead entity. All right, so let's do the MA60 broadband screen first. So this is where grantees will identify what broadband needs may exist in those low and moderate income neighborhoods. Those 1 and 2 bullets there you see on the screen, these are the 2 prompts that you'll actually see in the con plan template. So you're trying to identify that need for broadband and wiring and broadband services to households directly. And then you have any need for increased competition, having more than one service provider or ISP in the jurisdiction. And to respond to these prompts, you'll have to consult with either a service provider, an ISP, or another public or private agency that is working in this space. The word HUD uses is narrowing the digital divide. So work with those groups in your communities who are trying to increase broadband access to where your CDBG funds might be going. And at the bottom of the slide too, we've included some possible data sources to help you answer. The FCC has some good mapping. Like Nikki said earlier too, we'll have all these slides posted on HUD Exchange. So if you want to reference these later, you'll have this. But the FCC puts out some good maps to show you where broadband access is. The ACS has some good data too on where broadband is available, who's it available to, and that. And I think a new thing to highlight is this affordable connectivity program by the FCC. It's just up to a $30 a month subsidy for those households earning less than 200% poverty. That's just one criteria that would qualify them. There's a host of other ways households can be eligible for that subsidy. So I'd encourage you to check that out. There's a link there, but it's fcc.gov/ACP. Okay, so moving on to the MA65, the hazard mitigation screen. This screen reflects the need to really intentionally address the increasing impact of natural hazards on all communities, but then especially those vulnerable and low-income neighborhoods and households. So you'll look at the increased natural hazard risk your jurisdiction might be exposed to. I know the examples here are the desk guide. Might just talk about floodplains or a specific kind of hazard, but you're in your jurisdiction, so you know which hazards impact you the most. So this is where you address that issue. Then again, specifically, you're focusing on those risks and how it might make low-income households more vulnerable. just like MA60, MA65, there's required consultation here too. So you're probably working with your local emergency planning department or any agency that's responsible for management of those lands. Again, the HUD example is flood prone, but it could be other disasters too. So working with that agency that knows what those issues are, then maybe overlaying it with what you already know to be issues or vulnerable risks for those low-income neighborhoods. Similar to the last slide, at the bottom here, we have some suggestions of where you might look to help answer these prompts. If there's a local disaster planning department, they'll have some guidance. There's always that FEMA hazard mitigation plan if that's relevant to your jurisdiction. And then there's this community resilience planning guide by NIST, which could be helpful for you as well. And these are probably the newest things I know are probably taking up a lot of your time. So both HOMARP and CDBG CV funds. Just wanted to go over a couple of reminders here. HOMARP, so this is, the allocation plan for this needs to be submitted with your 2021 action plan. So this is a standalone HOMARP allocation plan. So you don't have to impact your con plan. You don't have to change your action plan screens. You're just uploading that HOMARP allocation plan as an attachment right to that 2021 action plan administration screen. And for CV, also just a reminder, all those CDBG funding and projects, those are to stay in that same action plan that you put them in initially. So as you adjust things moving forward in program years, you're just going back to that same action plan if you're making amendments for the CV funding. And you're keeping all that CDBG CV money there and all those CDBG CV projects in that same place too. I think the caveat there though is, you're still reporting on accomplishments in your CAPER every year. So although the CV funds might be tied to say a 2019 action plan, you're still tying all of the accomplishments. You're still reporting on that every single CAPER. If there are questions about either, so MA60, 65, or this, feel free to use Q&A. We're going to move into a little higher level talk about the eCon planning suite. This is not screen specific, but just kind of give people an overview of how data functions in the system, why it's important to get the con plan set up right to really set you up for success for each CAPER. So really we're going to talk about how the strategic plan aligns with the action plan, then gets down to the projects, and then gets into IDIS activities. Just a note here, you'll probably hear me say SP a lot, so I don't have to say strategic plan 30 times. So when I say SP, I mean the strategic plan. So I guess first, it's really important to keep in mind the information you enter into the SP is covering your entire cycle of the con plan. And so as you're planning out this document, you're trying to think ahead to a 5-year period. There are obviously challenges with that. This is your space to do the best you can, reaching out to the community, doing that needs assessment, market analysis to really set yourself up for that 5-year plan. So it's really focusing on those goals, needs, and the resources too. But taking a little step back here, this graphic is the components of the con plan and the action plan and really how they overlap with the eCon planning suite, which we'll cover. And it kind of gets into IDIS, which we're not covering today, but I think it's good to show you how these things all fit together. So first, you'll see the con plan sections include that process, the needs assessment, market analysis. So starting with the process section, so that section really is where you're summarizing your consultations, all of your community engagement, the stakeholder outreach, and really trying to understand the needs from the community perspective. Then that needs assessment is more data oriented. It's where you're using that ACS, that CHAS data, and other supplemental reports you might have locally to really get at what the needs are. Then you have the market analysis section. This is where you're looking more at the local market, and then both the housing perspective, and also you're still including the housing market from the perspective of those that might be experiencing homelessness, those with special needs, and then how might community development affect the market as well. So then really think of it like a funnel. You have the process, you have the needs assessment, you have the market analysis. All of those things really go into your SP and really help you define what your priority needs are and what you think your 5-year goals might be. And that anticipated resources section, which is the SP35 screen, that's really where you're outlining to HUD, this is what we think we'll have for a 5-year period. And then these are our needs, and these are our goals that we expect to achieve over that 5-year period. Then, so that's all con plan. So then under the action plan, you've kind of heard from Nikki, that first year action plan is embedded within. So as you're submitting your first con plan, that first year action plan is inside. So this includes the anticipated resources, and again, those priority needs and goals, those will be the same. So when you make those for your 5-year period, the con plan, when you make your action plan, those will be your options. So if you have 5 priority needs for your con plan, when you make the action plan, you'll have 5 options for priority needs. So speaking a little bit on anticipated resources, this is to include your annual allocation, any prior year resource that you're pulling forward. So if you have old funds that you're pulling into your latest action plan, you'd include that. You include your program income, your PI, and really get a final value of what you think your resources are that you can then fund projects and activities with. So if you know exactly how much you have to work with, you're deciding what your priority needs are. Again, you might have 10 in your SP. You don't necessarily have to pursue all of those every single action plan. And same with goals. You might have 10 goals in your SP. You don't have to pursue all 10 goals every action plan. Your options are limited to what you chose in your SP. You don't have to choose all of them. So then really kind of wraps up the action plan. So the big pieces are you're defining what your resources are, you're defining what you think your priority needs are for that one program year, and you're defining your goals. And then this is kind of where it crosses over from eCon planning suite a little bit into IDIS. So think of the project as really your bridge from eCon planning suite, higher level planning, into where you're getting a little bit more granular. And you're eventually going to be tying activities to that project where you have very specific funding. So it's important to get a general flow of the system functions. I think this graph does that well. We have like a few more to go through that will look at the same information but kind of cut up differently. So this graphic is really showing you how the goals from your SP, which is the SP45 goals, kind of flows all the way down to activity. And you'll see that CAPER box at the bottom. So you should know the CAPER reports by goal. It's really important to know that because you might spend a lot of time working in the activity level, but all the activities will boil back up to that SP section. So ultimately, the CAPER is most important when you're thinking about goals and how you're linking those to activities. This is the general flow of how it works. So in the con plan, you have your SP45 goals. You're choosing one of those goals in the action plan. Let's say, the AP20, you're attaching a project then to that one goal, and you're bundling one or more activities under that project, and all of those flow back up to the CAPER. I know this all sounds very simple, but I think we have a few more slides to go through that look at it differently. So this graphic is showing that the con plan, action plan, and CAPER relationship over the duration of your entire con plan cycle. So it's important to note here that each plan is associated to that single con plan. And I think Nikki will be telling you again later how important that is. But the new amendment feature will hopefully really eliminate your need to make different versions of con plans. You in essence won't be able to. So as long as you maintain the action plan relationships to the same con plan throughout the cycle, it'll make your CAPER much simpler to complete each year. But the main takeaway here is that you have your set of goals in the con plan. And then you're working on some or all of those in each of the action plans. And you can make amendments as needed. You always want to make amendments before you make the CAPER template. A small pitch here, we'll be doing 2 July webinars, both covering the CAPER, the first being to prepare for the CAPER, and the second one going into more detail about where the data comes from. I really just wanted to show you a larger step back of how the con plan impacts years 1 through 5. So it's important to get the con plan right, but you can always amend your con plan. And we would recommend always amend if you're going to do a con plan amendment about the same time you're working on an action plan. You always want to amend that con plan first before you start a new action plan. All right. So this is a little bit more specific. We'll spend a ton of time on this, but we'll be covering more like the goals and accomplishment data in the CAPER webinars. But it's good to get a sense of how this functions as you're setting up your con plan still. So as you develop your goals, you'll have to choose how you measure that goal. We call this the goal outcome indicator, or the GOI for short. You may have seen that. So in this example, the goal is to improve housing stock. You see on the left-hand side there, and the chosen GOI is homeowner housing rehab. So then moving to the right, we see there's a project associated to that goal. So imagine that goal, improve housing stock, is an action plan. You're bundling a project to that goal. That project is also using the same GOI of homeowner housing rehab. Then we have an activity to the right. This is getting down to that address level. And again, same GOI, so the homeowner housing rehab. So I think it's really important to highlight there is a one-to-one relationship between goal, project, activity, and how the data flows across the system. I do want to say too, if the GOIs are confusing, we'll go through the project setup here in a minute, but there's a really handy cheat sheet. It's Appendix B of the eCon Planning Suite Guest Guide. It starts on page 291, and it will give you a goal. So if you choose a goal in the goal setup screen, it'll tell you which GOI you should use. And also same for projects. It'll tell you which GOI to use. Then towards the end of that appendix, it'll say if you're using this GOI, you should use this matrix code for your activity. So as you're setting up your goals and your projects, I definitely recommend having that cheat sheet close by. All right, so this is similar to the last slide, but just a little bit more detail. So some specific numbers. At the highest level here to the left, we see an SP goal. Let's say we decided to name it rehab existing housing stock in neighborhood X. And we told HUD we think we're going to rehab 100 housing units over the 5-year period. Then in the action plan, we're pulling that goal forward for the action plan, same rehab existing housing stock in neighborhood X. But this time, since it's just 1 program year and not 5, we're going to estimate we're going to try to do 20. Then we associate a project to that goal. We're naming the project homeowner rehab, and the GOI is going to be the same, homeowner housing units rehabbed. We're going to estimate that project is 20 because we're going to do 1 project that includes all the activities. And we would bundle all those rehab activities to that 1 project. So in this case, it's 53 Main Street Rehab. That's the matrix code 14A. So let's say we'd have 20 of those activities. It bundles all together to that 1 project, and it would bundle up to that goal. And then again, going back to the left, it would bundle back up to that SP goal. So if we're thinking about the CAPER and how that functions, because the goal-oriented document, it's important to get that GOI and the goal right, and then make sure it matches your project, and make sure all those activities are bundled to the right project. And if there are any questions at all about these relationships between SP, that's a good question I can answer. So project and activity. So if we want to think a project is, again, it's that bridge between action plan, econ planning suite, and IDIS. So project is directly associated to a goal, where it could be homeowner rehab. And then activity is that very specific granular level where you're actually doing funding and drawdowns, and you're attaching that to a project. So it's just an extra layer of specificity. So from left to right here, we have SP goal, the highest level. That's the con plan. Action plan, we're getting a little bit more specific. Here we're down to the program year level. Project, we're only then talking about a portion of your fund of a CDBG program. And then activity is very specific. This is what we're funding, and this is how we're funding it. And if there are questions about this, the relationships between con plan, action plan, projects, activities, put those in the Q&A pod. We'll make sure we get to those. All right. So moving a bit away from the higher level, we're going to get into a little bit specific about how to set up a project in the econ planning suite. Okay. So there are two ways. We're going to go over both, but we always really strongly recommend to use method one. So method one, this is when you're already in your action plan. So you logged in, you're in IDIS, you go to your action plan, you're in that AP35 project screen. You're in that screen and you make your project from there. That's method one. Method two is really when you're in IDIS, on the left-hand side there, which I'll show you in a minute. On the left-hand side there, there's a project submenu. You can make projects from there. Don't recommend that for most grantees because if you make it from there, there's an extra step to actually link that project then to your action plan. We'll walk through these in more detail. Okay, so method one. So again, this is you're in your action plan. You're at that AP35 project screen. You would click AP35 and bullet 2 there. If you don't have any projects, this is what it would look like. It would say no projects have been added. You would click that add an existing project. And then with it brings you to the next screen, you would click that create a new project. And then you just go through all the motions of creating a project, which we'll walk through in a minute. But once you get to the end of that, it will just automatically include that project into the action plan. Okay, method two. So this is where, that first bullet there is what you would see on the left-hand side of IDIS. So you would click add project. You'd walk through all your steps to create the project. And once you finish making that, it's not yet in the action plan. Then you'd have to go into your action plan, back to that AP35 screen. You'd click add an existing project. And this time, instead of hitting create a new project, you would search for the projects. Then you'd find the project you want to add that you just made. Probably you click the add button there. But you just don't recommend this as often because it's just easier to forget sometimes if you did or didn't add it. Sometimes if you have more than one person working in IDIS, if they didn't add it as soon as they made it, you might end up with duplicate projects. So I just always recommend the first method. But no matter how you choose to do it, we'll walk through now some of the important bits. Okay, so the first table there, this annual goal supported, this is the first thing you'd see when you're making your project. But this would reflect all the goals and your priority needs at the bottom that you have active in your action plan. So first the goals. To really simplify your caper, we definitely recommend that you choose just one goal per project. If you choose more than one here, the system doesn't exactly know what to do with that data or how you want to split it up across two goals, so it just will give you a 0 value in your caper. So if you choose just one goal here, it's very clean for the system. and knows exactly where to put all those GOIs and all that accomplishment data come caper time. So we recommend, just choose one goal when setting up this project. And then the opposite is true for priority needs. So there's no hard data connection that happens when you're making priority needs. So feel free to select as many as you'd like for a project. All right, so the funding portion of the project setup. The top box is that estimated amount, which includes program income. This box is showing you the universe of all the HUD resources. I believe this is probably still from when the eCon planning suite was first made, because obviously it doesn't include CV funds, any of them. So really it's just the universe of funds when the eCon planning suite was created. And then that bottom box, this directly reflects your AP15. So for example, in your 2019 action plan, you might have like that other CDBG CV. If it's a 2019 project, you would see that option here. So whatever action plan you're in, wherever you're making that project, it'll look at the AP15 screen for that action plan. So in this example, this grantee is making a project, and their AP15 screen just has their CDBG, home, AMPLA, and ESG funding. Another thing to highlight here is that really these boxes should be the same. So if you have, the example shows 25,000 for a project in CDBG up top, that number should really be the same at the bottom. I think it's just a general good rule of thumb. Okay, this is the last bit, I think, on project setup. So really just wanted to hammer home the importance of getting these GOIs the same. So the system will let you choose a different GOI, so it's just really important that you use the same one throughout. And there is a handy, like when you go into the goal screen or the project screen, this table of GOIs, these goal outcome indicators, they're always the same, and they're always in the same row order. So if you want to get to know them well enough where you know what row 1 is, what row 10 is, that could be a way. But the main takeaway really is just make sure you're using the same GOI for a goal for each project you have associated to it. Oh, one more. This is just one, we get an ask a question about this a decent amount. I really just wanted to let people know this sort number here is not the same thing as your project ID number. So if you were to log in to your action plan, you go to the AP35 screen, you'll see this list of projects. It'll list them out by sort order. That is literally just how the order of which you added projects to this screen. This has nothing to do with the project ID number. This has no impact on the project really whatsoever. So don't get this confused with project ID. Sometimes grantees will remove a project and put a new one in. So their order will be, say, 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, like out of order. It doesn't matter. So this sort order doesn't impact project ID number, it does not impact your project really at all. So if these get out of order, I would say just don't worry about it. Okay, home stretch, this is it for the project setup then. Just to recap some of these tips, the biggest one really, we recommend always associate a project to a single goal. So one project to one goal. Again, make sure you're using that same GOI per project as you have in your associated goal. Avoid those duplicated projects. We kind of talked about how method 1 really helps to make sure that that doesn't happen. And then just one thing, as we always try and keep the caper in mind, any project that's not in your AP35 screen of your action plan, that data will not pull forward to your caper. So before you make a caper, always make sure all the projects you funded, you have accomplishments for, are in that AP35 screen. All right, so we're almost to the Q&A. I think Nikki has just a few more things to cover. So Nikki, I'll hand it back over to you.
All right.
All right, there you are.
All right, there we go. Okay, so now we will quickly go over the steps for creating a year 2 through 5 annual action plan. So the process for setting up an annual action plan is quite similar to the process for creating a comp plan. You have the same 2 options. So option 1 is to create a new action plan by copying a previous action plan, and option 2 is to create a new blank action plan template. So as with setting up the comp plan, there are the same pros and cons to each option that you should consider before making your plan. And there is also a separate quick guide that provides step-by-step instructions for creating an action plan, which is on the HUD Exchange. When using the copy option, it is important to note that the source plan for your year 2 action plan is going to be your consolidated plan. So as we've mentioned before, the year 1 action plan screens are included in your comp plan template. So if you would like to copy your year 1 action plan, the source plan is going to be your comp plan, and it needs to be in review completed status in order to be eligible for copying. Lastly, if you use the copy option, the projects from the source plan will no longer be copied over to the new action plan. So this used to be the case in the system when you copied a previous plan, but is no longer true. So for option 2, the process using the add link is also very similar to the process for creating a new comp plan. I'd like to point out that every year 2 through 5 action plan should be associated with the current comp plan. So on the AD26 screen, there is a prompt to associate the action plan with a comp plan. And every grantee should select yes and link their action plan to the current comp plan. And this is crucial to ensure that the goals, priority needs, and target areas from your comp plan are available to and associated with your action plan, and as Joel mentioned, that the data flows properly through to your CAPR. Again, the process is nearly the same for Consortia. The difference is that only the lead entity should set up the year 2 through 5 action plans, and only the lead entity will be able to submit the year 2 through 5 action plans. And as you may have guessed, a walkthrough of this process is available in its own quick guide for Consortia. All right, so we're nearing the end of our presentation, but before we go into Q&A, I'd like to summarize and provide links to the various resources that we've referenced during today's webinar. So here are the links to the eCon Planning Suite Desk Guide and the link to the page on the HUD Exchange that includes all of the quick guides that we've referenced throughout the presentation. There's also a link to past webinars and trainings that talk about topics on the con plan, the action plan, and the CAPR. And as Joel mentioned, there are upcoming trainings for later on in the summer for the CAPR. Lastly, at the bottom of the slide, there's some information on the UAT training environment. For those of you who aren't familiar with UAT, it is a separate server from IDIS production, which is the IDIS that you use for developing your comp plans, your action plans, CAPRs, as well as drawing down funds and reporting accomplishments. So you can think of UAT as a sandbox where you can practice completing actions in IDIS without the consequences of making a mistake in the real system. So if you're new to IDIS, this is a great way to practice setting up plans in UAT. Please do not practice in IDIS. You won't be able to delete comp plans, action plans, and CAPRs that were created incorrectly or by mistake. So if you'd like to practice, please use UAT. And if you have any questions about UAT or have trouble accessing it, please submit and ask a question or an AAQ to the IDIS AAQ Help Desk on the HUD Exchange, and we can help you. All right, so now I'll turn it over to Rob for our Q&A.
All right, thank you, Joel and Nikki, for that. And if you submit a question to eCon Ask a Question, it may be likely Joel or Nikki will respond to you. Okay, let's see. Our first question has to do with errors. Is it common to get errors on the error check that can't be that are difficult to sort through?
Yeah, advanced system. So that definitely does happen. Sometimes you'll get an error message or a warning where it might say not detecting narrative in XYZ field. And if there is narrative there, just ignore that. Sometimes we also see grantees saying they're getting an error for a screen they don't have access to for a home consortium. If you don't have access to that screen, you're definitely not required to respond to it. I hope that's what you mean.
Great, thanks, Joel.
Yeah.
Here's a question about alternative data sources. Do we have to manually enter them, or will they automatically be brought forward, I assume, into the new con plan? For example, the newer ACS data as mentioned.
Yeah, so I can answer this one. You will need to manually enter it. Kind of as we showed on one of the slides in the presentation, once you select the alternate data source button, the fields in the table will become editable. So you will need to go for ACS data, go to data.census.gov and locate, if you wanted to use a newer version of the ACS, you would need to locate the specific data table that you wanted to use. For CHAS on the slide, we included the link to HUD user, which is where you can find more recent CHAS data for your jurisdiction.
Great, thanks, Nikki. And here's one from someone new to CDBG. Welcome. The current com plan for this grantee runs through 2024, and they are at the point where they're needing to submit perhaps their first annual action plan. Is there anything that needs to be done in the com plan to update the com plan? Other than barring an amendment, they say. So this is anything routine needs to be done in the annual action plan in the probably the 5th year.
Yeah, that's a good question for someone who's new. The answer is probably no. You don't have to always inherently amend or change a comp plan every action plan cycle, but as you do your consultations, community engagement to decide how you're going to spend money in your action plan, if you find that what you want to spend money on, say a need or a goal, isn't aligning with what you have in your con plan, as you're doing your action plan is a perfect time to amend the con plan. So to answer short form, no, you don't have to, but as you're doing your action plan, it's always a good time to reassess to make sure your con plan still aligns.
Great, thanks, Joel. Here's a question. Actually, it came in through the chat, but it's an important one about UAT. Does it save work as your practice? And what should someone know about how persistent are things in UAT?
So yeah, UAT is, you can think of it as like a snapshot in time. So it is refreshed so that it pulls in the most recent data from IDIS, but the frequency is maybe every month or every other month. So until UAT has been refreshed with IDIS data, it will be a historical snapshot of the data that was in IDIS. And as you're working on it, you can save your work and come back to it at a later time. But as soon as it's refreshed, it's almost like an Etch-a-Sketch board where it's shaken and then changes that you've made in UAT, but not IDIS, are cleared away. And it once again reflects the current data in IDIS, if that makes sense.
Great, thanks, Nikki. It's a wonderful a resource. I encourage everyone to use it. I personally learned how to fund home subfunds and subgrants using UAT. So take advantage of it a little while ago. Can you please clarify regarding the submission of the home ARP allocation plan along with the annual action plan? What did you mean by that?
That's a good question. So I see a few that are kind of similar with home ARP. So I think I'll try to tackle all those together. So the home ARP allocation plan is a standalone Word document, from HUD Exchange that you've probably seen if you're working on home ARP. It is not a thing that you're working on inside the eCon planning suite. It's a standalone document that you'll attach to your 2021 action plan. And I saw someone else ask if you have to have your 21 action plan approved first, or how home ARP approval process impacts 2021 action plan, and it doesn't. So if you already have your 2021 action plan approved, that's fine. You'll open it to amend it just so you can edit it and really just upload that home ARP document. There's no impact between the two. They're separate.
Great, thanks, Joel. And we're just about out of time. As mentioned, if you have an important question, please do submit it to Ask a Question. Let's see, for annual goals, if more than one goal has been selected, should we start to select just one going forward or continue as we have had? So they've had multiple goals selected. What's the best practice there?
So I think the best practice moving forward will definitely be choosing one, for sure. But I think going into your caper, you already know you'll probably have to be doing more manual adjustments anyways. So, I mean, moving forward, I would suggest, yes, use one project, one goal relationship, for sure. And then just use those available reports to update data as you need. And also in July, again, Sales Pitch will have 2 webinars that kind of get into detail of how you can find data to help you.
All right, well, now we've come to the end of our webinar today. Thank you so much for joining us. Please take advantage of the resources on the HUD Exchange. Thank you, Joel, Nikki, and everyone behind the scenes at Cloudburst, and thank you for our guests from HUD, Gloria Coates and Aaron Martin. The slide deck transcript and recording will be available on the HUD Exchange in just a few weeks. Please do subscribe to news regarding IDIS and eCon Planning Suite on the HUD Exchange, so you'll receive those notices. And this concludes today's webinar.